One freezing night in Red Creek, Montana, 72-year-old farmer Harold Ward woke to the sound of terrified horses pounding inside his barn. He expected a wolf. Instead, he found a wounded police officer named Ethan Cox lying unconscious in the hay, guarded by Titan, a limping German shepherd who refused to leave his side. Harold had no idea that Ethan and Titan were being hunted by a powerful gun-smuggling network operating across the Canadian border. Hidden beneath an old feeding trough was evidence that could destroy a respected deputy chief, expose a corrupt freight company, and reveal the truth behind the death of Harold's only son 12 years earlier. How had Ethan reached the barn without being seen? Why did Titan trust an aging farmer with his injured partner? And what would Harold do when armed men came to his property looking for them? What happened next will make you believe that courage does not fade with age, and that sometimes God sends the truth to our door on 4 tired paws. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. Please subscribe and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the story. It was the first heavy snow of the season outside Red Creek, Montana, and the wind had been sweeping across the open fields since midnight. Harold Ward woke to the sound of horses striking their hooves against wooden stalls. At 72, Harold had spent most of his life on the same ranch, raising horses, repairing fences, and learning the difference between ordinary noise and fear. Horses shifted when they were cold. They snorted when coyotes passed beyond the fence. They kicked when another animal crowded them. Tonight, they were doing something else. They were warning him. Harold pushed back the quilt and sat on the edge of the bed. Beside him, his wife did not wake. Andrea Ward was 69 and had worked as a county hospital nurse for more than 30 years before retiring. Even in sleep, she rested lightly, one hand near the lamp as though some part of her still expected an emergency call. Harold pulled on wool trousers, an old work shirt, and the brown coat hanging behind the bedroom door. He took the flashlight from the kitchen shelf and lifted the hunting rifle from its rack. He had not fired it in years, but the ranch sat several miles beyond town, and an animal caught in a winter storm could become desperate. Outside, snow moved sideways beneath the porch light. It had already covered the yard, softened the fence posts, and turned the path to the barn into a pale strip between darker fields. The horses struck the walls again. "I'm coming," Harold muttered, though he knew they could not understand the words. The barn door resisted him before sliding open with a rough wooden groan. Warm air rolled out, carrying the smell of hay, leather, damp earth, and frightened animals. The horses had gathered at the far ends of their stalls. Several held their heads high, ears pointed toward the empty stall near the rear wall. Harold closed the door behind him and raised the flashlight. "Easy, Chester." Chester, an aging chestnut gelding Harold had owned for 16 years, stamped once and stared past him. Harold followed the horse's gaze. A low growl came from the darkness. He stopped. The sound was deep and controlled, not the wild warning of a stray dog. It came from an animal that knew how to hold its ground. Harold shifted the rifle against his shoulder and moved the beam toward the unused stall. For a moment he saw only stacked hay, an old saddle, and a broken length of fence rail. Then 2 amber eyes caught the light. A large German shepherd stepped out from behind the wooden partition. His black and tan coat was soaked, heavy with melting snow, and darkened by mud. One rear leg trembled whenever he put weight on it. A small tear marked the edge of his left ear. The dog lowered his body and stood across the stall entrance. Harold kept the light steady. "Well," he said quietly, "you are not one of mine." The German shepherd growled again. He did not rush forward. He did not bark. His attention stayed fixed on Harold's hands, the rifle, and every small movement of his boots. Harold noticed the dog's collar. It was wide, dark, and made for working animals. A metal tag hung beneath the thick fur. The dog glanced behind him. That brief movement told Harold more than the growl had. The animal was not guarding the barn. He was guarding something inside the stall. Harold moved half a step to the side, trying to see past him. The German Shepherd immediately shifted with him, blocking the opening. "All right," Harold said. "You have made your point." He lowered the rifle, then slowly placed it on the floor. The dog watched until Harold pushed it farther away with the side of his boot. Harold removed one glove and held out his empty hand. "I'm not here to take anything from you." The growling softened, but it did not stop. Harold could now see beyond the dog's shoulder. A man lay on the straw near the back wall. His dark uniform was wet, torn at one shoulder and covered in dirt. One arm rested awkwardly beneath him. His face was pale, and a dark bruise showed near his temple. Harold's chest tightened. The man wore a police uniform. There was no visible gunshot wound. No blood covered the straw, but the officer was completely still. Harold bent slightly, trying to judge whether the man was breathing. The German Shepherd bared his teeth. Harold straightened and stepped back. "If he is alive, he needs more than you standing there." The dog's ears moved at the sound of Harold's voice. Harold pointed toward the farmhouse, though the animal could not see it through the barn wall. "My wife was a nurse. She can help him." The German Shepherd looked back at the unconscious officer, then returned his gaze to Harold. Harold sat down on a low hay bale several feet away. His knees complained, but he ignored them. He had learned long ago that frightened animals did not trust urgency. They trusted patience. For nearly a minute, neither moved. Wind pressed against the barn. The horses breathed heavily in their stalls. Snow hissed against the roof like sand. Harold spoke in the same calm voice he used with injured foals. "You found shelter. That was smart. You stayed with him. That was smarter. But you cannot do the next part alone." The dog's growl faded into a low vibration. Harold reached for the small metal whistle hanging from a cord inside his coat. He used it when calling horses from the far pasture. He raised it slowly, allowing the dog to see the movement, then blew 3 long notes. The sharp sound filled the barn. The German Shepherd flinched but did not leave the officer. Harold waited. A few minutes later, light moved across the yard outside. Andrea entered the barn wearing a gray coat over her night clothes, carrying a medical bag in one hand and a lantern in the other. She stopped when she saw the dog. "Harold," she said carefully, "why is there a German Shepherd in our barn?" "He came with a police officer." Andrea looked past the animal and saw the man on the straw. Her expression changed at once. The tiredness left her face, replaced by the quiet focus that had guided her through decades of emergency rooms. She set down the lantern. "How close has he allowed you to get?" "Not close enough." Andrea studied the German Shepherd. "He is guarding his handler." "That was my guess." She slowly removed her gloves and crouched several feet from the stall. "My name is Andrea," she said to the dog. "I need to check him." Harold glanced at her. "You know he cannot answer." "He seems more sensible than several patients I treated." Under other circumstances, Harold might have smiled. Andrea opened the medical bag and placed a folded blanket where the dog could see it. Then she waited. The German Shepherd looked at the blanket, at Andrea, and at the unconscious officer. His body remained tense, but after several long seconds he stepped backward. Only one step. Andrea moved closer. The dog followed every motion as she placed 2 fingers against the officer's neck. "He has a pulse," she said. Harold released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Andrea checked the man's pupils, touched the bruised temple, and carefully examined the injured shoulder. The officer stirred once, but did not wake. "No bullet wound," she said. "Possible concussion. The shoulder is dislocated. He is dehydrated, exhausted, and dangerously cold. Can we move him?" "We have to." Harold brought the small wooden feed cart from the center aisle. Together he and Andrea spread blankets over it, then carefully lifted the officer from the straw. The German Shepherd moved close, watching Harold's hands. When the officer's injured arm shifted, the dog released a warning sound. Andrea spoke without looking up. "We know. We are being careful." Somehow, her tone seemed to satisfy him. They laid the officer on the cart and wrapped him tightly. Harold took the handles while Andrea steadied the man's head. The German shepherd followed beside them, limping but refusing to fall behind. They entered the farmhouse through the rear kitchen door. Andrea directed Harold to the room at the end of the hallway. It had once belonged to their only son, Matthew. The bed remained beneath the small window, and a faded photograph still stood on the dresser. Harold did not look at the photograph for long. They placed the officer on the bed. Andrea removed the wet outer uniform jacket, covered him with dry blankets, and began treating the shoulder. The German shepherd inspected the room, then lowered himself beside the bed. His injured leg stretched awkwardly behind him, but his eyes remained open. Andrea found the officer's badge inside the damp jacket. "Ethan Cox," she read. "Red Creek County Police." Harold crouched near the dog's collar and waited for permission before touching the metal tag. The shepherd watched him, but did not growl. "K9 Titan," Harold said. Titan lifted his head at the name. Andrea began warming Ethan with heated towels and checked his breathing again. "He may stay unconscious for a while," she said, "but he is alive." Harold returned to the barn to settle the horses and search the stall. The straw where Ethan had been lying was crushed, but there was no blood and no sign of a struggle. Near the old feeding trough, the ground had been disturbed. Harold moved the trough aside and found a black waterproof bag tucked beneath loose boards. He carried it into the kitchen. Inside were a small USB drive, a freight ledger, photographs of wooden crates filled with rifles, and shipping documents marked with the name Northern Harvest Freight. Harold stared at the company name longer than the rest. He had seen it before. Before he could say anything, Titan appeared in the kitchen doorway. The dog looked at the open bag, then struck one front paw against the floor 3 times. Harold met Andrea's eyes. A light appeared beyond the window. Then another. A vehicle was moving slowly along the private road toward the house. Harold closed the bag, switched off the kitchen light, and drew the curtains. Andrea returned to Ethan's room, while Titan turned toward the front door, every tired muscle alert. Harold reached for the rifle he had brought in from the barn. He had gone outside expecting to find a frightened horse or a wandering animal. Instead, he had brought a wounded police officer into his home, discovered evidence of illegal weapons, and watched an unknown vehicle approach through the snow. Ethan Cox was not merely injured. Someone was hunting him. Near dawn, Ethan opened his eyes. For several seconds, he did not move. The room was unfamiliar, the ceiling low and wooden, the air warm with the faint smell of cedar, coffee, and old blankets. Pain spread through his shoulder before memory returned. The forest, the snow, the men behind him, then Titan. Ethan tried to sit up too quickly. Pain struck through his shoulder and forced him back against the pillow. Andrea was beside him at once. "Stay down," she said. "Your shoulder is back in place, but that does not mean it has forgiven you." Ethan ignored the warning and looked toward the floor. Titan lay beside the bed, his head resting on his front paws. The German shepherd lifted his eyes the moment Ethan moved. He struggled to rise, but Ethan reached down with his good hand. "Easy." Titan pressed his muzzle against Ethan's fingers and released a low breath. Only then did Ethan look toward the doorway, where Harold stood with a cup of coffee in one hand. "The bag," Ethan said. "Safe," Harold answered. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The tension in his face eased, but only slightly. "Did anyone come here?" Harold entered the room and set the coffee on the dresser. "2 men came before dawn." Ethan's eyes opened again. "Police?" "They said they were looking for a missing officer." "What uniforms?" "They were not wearing any." Harold explained that the vehicle had stopped near the front gate shortly after he found the waterproof bag. 2 men came to the porch wearing dark winter coats. They claimed Ethan had disappeared during a routine patrol and asked whether Harold had seen a wounded officer or a police dog. They had no emergency lights, no marked vehicle, and no identification visible. One of them kept looking toward the barn. The other asked how many people lived in the house. Harold told them he had seen no officer and that the only thing disturbing his horses was the storm. He also told them Andrea had a fever and that they did not welcome visitors before sunrise. "That part was not true," Andrea said. "The fever or the visitors?" Ethan asked. "Both," Harold continued. The men remained at the gate longer than necessary. One walked close enough to the barn to study the fresh snow, but Harold had already led 2 horses through the yard and dragged a feed sled across the path. Any tracks left by Ethan and Titan were buried beneath hoof prints and broken drifts. After nearly 10 minutes, the strangers returned to their vehicle and drove away. Ethan listened without interrupting. When Harold finished, he asked, "Did they give names?" "No." "Did they touch anything?" "Not that I saw." Ethan looked toward Titan. The dog's ears were raised, though the rest of his body remained still. "They know I survived," Ethan said. Andrea folded her arms. "Then perhaps you should tell us what survived with you." Harold did not speak, but his expression carried the same question. Ethan glanced toward the hallway. "The bag is here?" Harold brought it from the kitchen and placed it on the bed within reach. Ethan opened it carefully. He checked the USB drive first, then the freight ledger and photographs. The relief on his face was brief. He looked like a man counting survivors after a disaster and finding fewer than he hoped. "What is this?" Harold asked. Ethan rested his head against the wall. "For 6 months, Titan and I have been tracking illegal weapons moving through Red Creek County." Harold pulled a wooden chair closer. Andrea remained by the bed. Ethan explained that the first clue came from a routine traffic stop. Titan alerted to the rear of a truck carrying farm equipment. The driver's documents were legal, and the cargo appeared ordinary, but Titan continued signaling near the wooden crates beneath a dismantled tractor. Before Ethan could obtain a search order, Deputy Chief Logan Hughes ordered the truck released. At the time, Ethan believed Logan was avoiding a legal dispute. A week later, 3 rifles were recovered during an arrest in another state. Their serial numbers had been removed, but one internal lot number led investigators back to a manufacturer whose shipment had supposedly never entered Montana. Ethan began comparing reports. Weapons recovered in Idaho, North Dakota, and Washington showed signs of passing through the same distribution chain. Freight receipts listed grain, engine parts, fencing tools, and farm machinery. The trucks belonged to Northern Harvest Freight. The routes crossed remote roads near the Canadian border, where patrol coverage was thin and weather often erased tracks within hours. "Why use farm trucks?" Harold asked. "Because nobody questions a truck carrying seed or tractor parts through ranch country," Ethan said. "People see what they expect to see." Andrea looked toward the waterproof bag, and someone inside the police department made sure no one looked closer. Ethan nodded. The next break came from a warehouse employee named Aaron Rogers. Aaron was 34, a night inventory clerk at Northern Harvest Freight. He had worked there for 7 years and knew every loading schedule, storage code, and driver rotation. He was not a police informant by nature. He was a quiet man with a wife, a young daughter, and a fear of losing both. Aaron contacted Ethan after discovering that several crates marked as hydraulic equipment had been loaded under armed supervision. When one crate broke, he saw rifle barrels wrapped in oilcloth. He began copying records. "He met me twice," Ethan said. "The first time, he only talked. The second time, he gave me the ledger and the USB. The USB contained shipping lists, vehicle numbers, payment transfers, and photographs of weapon crates hidden inside agricultural cargo. It also contained coded references to a place called Barn 4. Aaron warned Ethan that some shipments crossed the border through private land, avoiding official checkpoints. He also claimed Northern Harvest received advance notice whenever federal agents planned inspections. "Who was the federal contact?" Harold asked. "Special Agent Megan Howard." Megan Howard was 41 and worked with a federal task force investigating cross-border trafficking. She had spent 12 years tracing weapons, forged shipping documents, and money transfers tied to organized crime. Ethan trusted her because she had refused several public awards and had once reopened a case after admitting her own team had missed evidence. He arranged to deliver Aaron's files to her outside Red Creek. Before the meeting could happen, Aaron disappeared. His wife reported him missing, but Logan Hughes classified the case as a possible voluntary departure. According to the official report, Aaron had taken cash from a household account and left after an argument. Ethan did not believe it. Aaron loved his daughter, he said. He carried her drawing in his wallet. He would not disappear without calling her. The night before Ethan was found, he and Titan returned to a wooded service road near the border. Aaron had marked it in the ledger as a transfer route. Titan located tire tracks, packing straps, and traces of gun oil near an abandoned logging path. Then headlights appeared behind them. 2 vehicles entered from opposite directions. Ethan remembered men leaving the trees. He remembered Titan pulling him away from the road. He remembered a hard impact near his head and the sound of branches breaking under snow. After that, memory came only in fragments. Cold ground, Titan's breath near his face, the dog pulling at his sleeve whenever he stopped moving, a distant light. "I do not remember seeing your barn," Ethan told Harold. "I remember Titan dragging me toward something warm, then nothing." Harold looked down at the dog. Titan's eyes remained on Ethan. "He brought you here," Harold said. Ethan nodded. "He usually has better judgment than I do." Andrea almost smiled, but Harold had picked up one of the shipping documents. The Northern Harvest emblem was printed at the top. His hand stopped moving. Andrea noticed first. "Harold?" He did not answer. The name on the paper had pulled him backward 12 years. Their only son, Matthew Ward, had driven freight trucks for Northern Harvest. Matthew had been 36 when his vehicle left a mountain road during a late-night run. The company said he had fallen asleep at the wheel. No cargo was found at the scene. Harold had always believed thieves arrived before the sheriff. Now he was no longer certain. Andrea left the room and returned carrying a dented metal box. It had remained in the back of Matthew's closet since the funeral. Inside were work gloves, old receipts, photographs, and a small notebook. Harold opened it slowly. Most pages contained fuel totals and delivery times. Several others listed license plates, warehouse codes, and dates. On the final page, Matthew had written one sentence. "If something happens to me, check barn 4. The room became very quiet. Ethan looked from the notebook to the freight ledger. The same words appeared in both. Harold sat beside the bed, the notebook resting in his hands. For 12 years, he had believed his son died because of one careless moment on an icy road. Now he understood there might have been nothing careless about it. Matthew had seen something, and whatever he had seen was still moving through Red Creek. By late morning, the snow had eased, but the sky over Red Creek remained gray and heavy. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the waterproof bag open beside him. His injured arm rested in a sling Andrea had made from an old cotton sheet, while his good hand moved between the USB drive and a small laptop Harold rarely used. The files opened slowly. Some contained freight schedules, others showed payment records, vehicle numbers, and coded delivery notes. Several folders were protected by passwords, and one large file appeared damaged. Ethan tried combinations based on Aaron's name, his employee number, and the dates written in the freight ledger. Nothing worked. Across the room, Titan lay near the stove. Andrea had cleaned the cut on his rear leg and wrapped it with a firm bandage. The German Shepherd had accepted the treatment with patience, though his expression suggested that he considered the entire process unnecessary. Every few minutes, Titan lifted his head and looked toward the back door. Harold noticed. "He wants outside." "He needs rest," Andrea said. Titan rose anyway. The dog tested his injured leg, adjusted his weight, then walked toward the door. He stopped there and looked back at Ethan. Ethan watched him for a moment. "That is not a request." Harold opened the door. Cold air entered the kitchen as Titan stepped onto the porch and moved toward the barn. His limp was visible, but his direction never changed. Ethan pushed back from the table. Andrea pointed at his sling. You are not following him. I need to know what he found. You need to remain upright." Harold pulled on his coat. "I'll go." Ethan started to object, but Andrea gave him a look that ended the discussion. Harold followed Titan through the snow. The dog paused twice, looking back to make sure the old farmer was still behind him, then entered the barn. The horses were calmer than they had been the night before. Chester lowered his head over the stall door and breathed against Harold's shoulder as he passed. Titan went directly to the empty stall where Ethan had been found. He did not stop at the disturbed straw or the loose boards where the waterproof bag had been hidden. Instead, he moved toward the old feeding trough against the rear wall. The trough had not been used in years. One end had split, and the wood had darkened from moisture and age. Harold had planned to remove it many times, but there was always a fence to repair, a gate to reset, or another season arriving before he was ready. Titan lowered his nose to the floor beside it. Then he struck one paw against the boards. 3 times. Harold stood still. He had seen the dog use the same signal in the kitchen when looking at Ethan's evidence bag. This was not random scratching. "You smell something?" Titan pawed the same spot again. Harold moved the trough. It resisted at first, its legs pressed deep into dust and old straw. He gripped the broken edge and dragged it several feet aside. Beneath it, one floorboard sat slightly higher than the others. Harold crouched and ran his fingers along the edge. The board had been cut cleanly, then fitted back into place. Someone had wanted it to look untouched. He found a flat iron tool on the wall and worked it beneath the wood. The board lifted with a dry creak. Underneath was a shallow space between the barn supports. A rusted tin box rested inside. Harold stopped breathing for a moment. The box was familiar. Matthew had used several like it when he worked for Northern Harvest. He kept fuel receipts, route papers, and spare keys inside them because he did not trust the company's office lockers. Harold reached down and lifted the box from the darkness. Titan sat beside him. The old farmer brushed away the dirt and opened the lid. Inside were several photographs held together by a cracked rubber band. The first showed wooden crates stacked inside a freight trailer. They had no shipping labels, no inspection marks, and no destination codes. One crate stood partly open, revealing the dark shape of rifle stocks beneath layers of canvas. The next photograph showed 3 Northern Harvest trucks parked behind an abandoned livestock building. Harold turned it over. Matthew had written a date on the back, 12 years earlier. There were fuel receipts from stations far outside the routes listed in Matthew's official records. Several had been paid in cash. Others carried handwritten notes showing late-night stops near remote border roads. A folded sheet of paper listed truck license plates and driver initials. Harold recognized Matthew's handwriting immediately. At the bottom of the box lay a small portable recorder. Its plastic casing was scratched, and the battery compartment had been taped shut. Harold carried the box back to the house. Titan followed, no longer looking toward the barn. Inside, Andrea cleared a place on the kitchen table. Ethan closed the laptop and examined the contents. "These plates," he said. "Some of them appear in Aaron's files." Harold placed the recorder between them. "I think Matthew left this." Andrea touched the edge of the box, but she did not speak. Ethan opened the battery cover. The old cells had corroded, but the recording cassette inside remained intact. Harold found a larger cassette player in a cabinet near the living room. It had once belonged to Andrea, who used it for recorded nursing lectures. After cleaning the tape gently, Ethan placed it inside. For several seconds, there was only static. Then Matthew's voice entered the room. It was older than memory and younger than grief. His voice sounded tired but controlled. He said Northern Harvest had been moving weapons inside shipments marked as farm machinery and grain equipment. The drivers were ordered to avoid official inspection sites and follow private roads near the border. Matthew explained that the trucks traveled only on specific nights. Patrol cars were reassigned before each convoy arrived. Checkpoints closed early. Reports of suspicious freight disappeared before they reached county investigators. Then he mentioned a police contact. He did not say the full name. He used only two initials, LH. According to Matthew, LH provided patrol schedules, warned the company about inspections, and ordered officers to ignore Northern Harvest vehicles with a blue strip painted beneath the rear bumper. Ethan leaned closer to the recorder. Harold remained completely still. The tape clicked, then continued. Matthew said he had photographed several shipments and copied fuel records. He believed someone at the company knew he was asking questions. He had tried to speak with his father but could not explain everything without placing his family in danger. Harold's face tightened. A memory returned with painful clarity. Matthew standing near the barn door on a cold evening, telling him that something was wrong at work. Harold had been tired after repairing a broken water line. He had listened for less than a minute before telling his son not to challenge people with more money and power than he had. He had called it practical advice. Now it sounded like surrender. On the tape, Matthew's breathing changed. A heavy knock struck what sounded like a vehicle door. Once, then again. Matthew lowered his voice. "If I do not make it home, it was not an accident." The recording ended. No one moved. The only sound in the kitchen came from the stove and Titan's slow breathing beneath the table. Harold stood abruptly and walked toward the sink. His hands gripped the counter. "He tried to tell me." Andrea followed, but did not touch him at first. "I told him to stay quiet," Harold said. "I told him men like that always win. You were trying to protect him. I taught him that his father would not stand beside him." Andrea placed a hand on his back. "You were afraid. That is not the same as not loving him." Harold looked down. "It did not save him." "No," Andrea said gently. "But blaming yourself will not bring him back either." She turned him toward the table where the photographs, receipts, and recorder remained. "We cannot return to that night. We cannot answer him sooner, but we can answer him now." Harold looked at her, his eyes filled with something too old to be surprise and too painful to be relief. Andrea continued, "We can make sure the truth he carried does not die in this box." Ethan examined the remaining contents. Beneath the recorder was a small brass key. It fit no lock on the tin box. Harold brought Matthew's notebook from the bedroom. The cover seemed ordinary, but when Ethan ran his fingers along the spine, he found a narrow metal slot hidden beneath the binding. The brass key fit. A thin compartment opened inside the back cover. There, folded into a strip no wider than a finger, was a set of coordinates and two words written in Matthew's hand. Barn 4. Ethan returned to the laptop and entered the coordinates into the mapping file from Aaron's USB. A rural location appeared north of Red Creek, close to the Canadian border, an abandoned cattle property. The same location had been hidden inside Aaron's coded shipping records. Ethan looked at Harold. Matthew and Aaron found the same place. Harold closed the notebook carefully. 12 years separated the two men. The secret had not changed. Only the people willing to carry it had. The next morning arrived under a pale winter sky, with snow resting across the fields and the wind moving lightly through the bare cottonwoods near the road. Inside the farmhouse, no one had slept well. Ethan remained in Matthew's old room, his injured shoulder secured in the sling Andrea had made for him. The laptop, the USB, Matthew's notebook, and the tin box were hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the pantry. Titan lay in the hallway outside the bedroom, his injured leg wrapped and his ears alert to every sound beyond the walls. Harold stood by the kitchen window when he saw 3 men approaching the house. The first was Deputy Chief Logan Hughes, 52, a senior law enforcement officer in Red Creek County and one of the most trusted public figures in the area. He wore a dark uniform beneath a heavy winter coat, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. 2 local officers followed him. One was a broad-shouldered patrolman in his early 40s named Officer Dale Mercer, whose job was to cover the rural roads north of town. The other was Officer Scott Bell, a younger deputy of 31 who had joined the department only 2 years earlier. A county vehicle waited near the gate. Harold watched the 3 men cross the yard. Andrea stepped beside him. "You expected this?" I expected someone, Harold said. I did not know they would bring badges. Logan carried a wicker basket in one hand. A loaf of bread, canned soup, coffee, and a small jar of honey were visible beneath a folded cloth. It was the kind of gift neighbors brought after a storm. It was also the kind of gift a man might bring when he wanted to enter a house without appearing suspicious. Harold opened the front door before Logan could knock. "Morning, Harold." "Logan." The deputy chief gave him a warm smile. "We heard you lost power last night." "It came back. I thought Andrea might appreciate a few supplies." Harold looked at the basket but did not reach for it. "That is thoughtful." Logan held the smile a moment longer, then set the basket on the porch rail. "We are also looking for one of our officers." Harold said nothing. Logan continued. "Officer Ethan Cox failed to report after a patrol near the northern service roads. His K-9 is missing too. We are concerned that the people he was investigating may have taken them." The words sounded careful and reasonable. Behind Logan, Dale Mercer looked toward the barn. Scott Bell studied the tracks in the snow near the side of the house. Harold stepped farther onto the porch and closed the door behind him. "You think someone kidnapped a police officer?" "It is possible." "Then why are there only 3 of you?" Logan's expression did not change. "We do not want to alarm the county before we know what happened." Harold rested one hand on the porch rail. "That sounds considerate." Logan glanced toward the kitchen window. "Is Andrea home?" "She is resting." "Not feeling well." "Cold night." The answer was vague, but Logan let it pass. Inside the house, Andrea stood in the hallway near Matthew's room. She had closed the curtains and placed a folded quilt against the lower gap beneath the door to block any light or shadow. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, listening. Titan lay beside him, but his body was no longer relaxed. His head had lifted the moment Logan's voice carried through the wall. Ethan placed one hand on the dog's neck. "Stay." Titan remained still. Outside, Logan asked whether Harold had seen any vehicles during the night. "No." "Any strangers?" "No." "Any injured animals?" Harold looked toward the barn. "One of the mares was restless." Dale Mercer stepped down from the porch and took a few slow steps across the yard. Logan did not stop him. Harold noticed. "Your officer seems interested in my barn." "We are checking every structure along this road." "You brought a warrant?" Logan's smile narrowed slightly. "No one is accusing you of anything." "Then no one needs to search my property." For the first time, the air between them changed. Only a little. Logan placed one gloved hand on the porch post. "Harold, I am trying to find a missing man. And I am trying to keep 3 officers from wandering around my land without permission." Scott Bell looked uncomfortable. Dale Mercer stopped near the edge of the yard but continued watching the barn. Logan lowered his voice. "Ethan may be hurt." Harold met his eyes. "If he is, I hope you find him." Inside the house, Titan's nose lifted. A faint scent had reached him through the hallway. His muscles tightened. Logan moved closer to the door, enough that the leather sleeve of his coat brushed against the porch frame. Titan released a low growl. It was barely audible. Andrea heard it. So did Ethan. He placed both hands on Titan and leaned close. "What is it?" Titan stared at the door. Then the dog's nose moved toward Ethan's uniform jacket, which Andrea had folded beneath a blanket on a chair near the hallway wall. Logan stepped closer outside. Titan's growl deepened. Ethan understood. The dog was not reacting to the voice. He was reacting to a scent, the same scent that had been in the forest near the ambush. Ethan's face tightened. On the porch, Logan looked past Harold toward the window nearest Matthew's room. "Would you mind if I spoke to Andrea?" "Yes." Logan studied him. Harold did not look away. After several seconds, the deputy chief stepped back. Dale Mercer returned to the porch. "Nothing obvious," he said. Logan gave a small nod. Harold noticed that no one had asked what "nothing obvious" meant. Logan picked up the basket and held it out again. "At least take this." Harold accepted it this time, not from gratitude, but to end the visit. Logan looked toward the barn one last time. "Wood buildings are fragile in winter." Harold waited. A spark from a heater, Logan continued. A bad wire, dry hay. A family can lose everything before the fire trucks arrive. The warning was buried beneath the tone of friendly advice. Harold's expression hardened. At my age, Logan, I do not have enough patience left for threats disguised as concern. Scott Bell looked down. Dale Mercer shifted his weight. Logan's face remained calm, but the warmth had left it. You misunderstand me. No, Harold said. I understand you clearly. For a moment, no one moved. Then Logan turned toward the vehicle. We will be checking the area all day. Call the department if you see anything. I will keep that in mind. The three men crossed the yard and drove away. Harold remained on the porch until the county vehicle disappeared beyond the bend. Only then did he return inside. Ethan was waiting in the hallway with Titan beside him. It was Logan, Ethan said. Harold set the basket on the table. You are certain? Titan smelled him at the ambush. Andrea looked toward the front door. That means Logan was there. Or close enough to leave his scent on someone or something, Ethan said. Either way, he knew where to look. Harold took his coat from the hook. Then I want to know what else he left behind. He walked to the truck parked beside the barn. Titan followed despite his limp. The dog moved around the vehicle slowly, nose close to the lower frame. Near the rear bumper, he stopped. Titan struck one paw against the frozen ground 3 times. Harold crouched. A small black device had been fixed beneath the bumper with a magnetic strip. Ethan joined him at the edge of the porch. A tracker. Harold removed it carefully with a pair of pliers. Andrea went inside to call town, but the telephone line gave no sound. She tried her mobile phone. No signal. Ethan checked his own device and received the same result. They cut the landline, Andrea said. And they are blocking the mobile signal, Ethan answered. The farmhouse suddenly felt smaller. Harold looked toward the fields. The road was empty. Then Andrea remembered the old radio in the storage room, the one Harold used during blizzards and livestock emergencies. It operated on a private local frequency shared by farmers across the northern valley. They set it on the kitchen table. Andrea adjusted the dial and spoke in a steady voice. This is Ward Farm. We need a message passed to Special Agent Megan Howard. Tell her Ethan Cox is alive. Tell her Barn 4 is real. Static answered. Then a faint voice repeated part of the message. Someone had heard. They did not know who. Harold stepped back to the window. At the far end of the road, beneath a line of trees, a black truck sat with its engine running. It did not approach. It did not leave. It simply watched the house. Titan stood beside Harold and stared toward it. The badge had come to the front door with bread, coffee, and polite words. The danger had remained after it left. By evening, the black truck was gone from the road, but no one believed the danger had passed. Snow clouds gathered again over Red Creek, turning the fields beyond the farmhouse into a flat, gray distance. Harold checked every door, every window, and every lock on the barn. Ethan kept the waterproof evidence bag close, while Andrea placed the old radio beside the kitchen table and tested the emergency frequency twice. Titan remained near the back door. He had eaten little. His bandaged legs still troubled him, but every sound from the yard brought his head up. The horses sensed the same tension. They shifted in their stalls and called softly whenever the wind pressed against the barn walls. Shortly after nightfall, the lights went out. The kitchen fell dark so suddenly that the stove clock disappeared in the middle of a number. The refrigerator stopped humming. The porch lamp vanished. Even the heating system gave one final click before the farmhouse became silent. Harold looked through the window. The neighboring farms still had power. This is not the storm, he said. Ethan rose from the table, protecting his injured shoulder with one arm. Stay away from the glass. Andrea found the battery lantern and covered most of its light with a dish towel. Harold moved toward the front room, where the curtains were already closed. Titan stood stiffly beside the back door. Then he growled. Harold lifted one edge of the curtain. Dark figures were crossing the field. They moved in pairs, low and deliberate, wearing black winter clothing that blended with the trees. A truck rolled sideways across the private road and stopped near the gate, blocking the only clear route to the county highway. 2 more men separated from the others and headed toward the barn. "They are not here to ask questions," Harold said. Ethan opened the pantry door and pulled aside a rug covering the entrance to the old vegetable cellar. "Take the evidence down." Andrea lifted the waterproof bag. Harold guided her toward the narrow wooden steps, then helped Ethan descend behind her. The cellar had been built beneath the kitchen decades earlier. Its stone walls held shelves of preserves, potatoes, tools, and winter supplies. A second hatch opened into a root passage that ended near the orchard, but deep snow had likely blocked it. Titan refused to follow. He stood at the kitchen door, looking toward the barn. "Titan," Ethan said quietly. "Down." The dog glanced at him, then turned back toward the yard. A horse struck the barn wall. Another answered. Titan's growl deepened. "He will not leave them," Harold said. Ethan started up the steps. Andrea caught his good arm. "You can barely use one shoulder. I am not leaving him outside alone." Before anyone could argue, a dull crash came from the far side of the farm. Orange light rose behind the barn. "They set the storage shed on fire," Harold said. The shed held feed, old tools, and dry timber. Flames climbed fast beneath the roof, bright against the snow. The attackers were not trying to destroy evidence there. They were trying to force the family into the open. Harold took the rear door key from its hook. "Stay in the cellar." Andrea stared at him. "You are not going alone. The horses will burn if that fire reaches the barn." Titan pressed against the door. Ethan climbed back into the kitchen. "We go together." Harold shook his head. "You are still injured. And you are 72. That has never stopped me from making poor decisions." For the first time that night, Andrea almost smiled. Then another crash came from the barn. The smile disappeared. Harold opened the rear door. Cold air and smoke swept into the kitchen. He and Titan moved into the darkness, keeping the house between them and the men crossing the field. Ethan followed several steps behind, holding a flashlight low. Andrea remained at the cellar entrance long enough to secure the evidence. Then she returned to the kitchen and switched on the radio. Static filled the room. She pressed the transmitter. "This is Ward Farm," she said. "The barn lights are out. We need neighbors." It was an old phrase used by ranch families during storms, accidents, and emergencies. It did not explain the danger. It did not need to. Andrea repeated it twice. Outside, Harold reached the barn through the rear gate. Titan entered first, moving quickly despite his limp. The horses were in full panic. Chester kicked at his stall door. Smoke had begun slipping through gaps near the roof, and sparks from the burning shed were landing on the shingles. Harold opened the first stall and slapped the lead rope against the horse's shoulder. "Move!" One by one, the horses rushed into the snow-covered field behind the barn. Titan ran along the aisle, turning them toward the open gate whenever they hesitated. He did not bark. He used his body, his eyes, and the authority of an animal accustomed to being obeyed. Ethan heard a sound near the house, a window opening. He turned back. One of the attackers had entered through the pantry and was searching the kitchen. The man carried a flashlight and moved directly toward the loose floorboard where the evidence had previously been hidden. Ethan approached from the dark hallway. The intruder heard him too late. He swung around, but Titan appeared behind Ethan with his teeth bared. The man froze between them. "On the floor," Ethan ordered. The attacker reached inside his coat. Titan lunged forward just enough to change his mind. Ethan forced him down and secured his wrists with a length of electrical cord from the kitchen drawer. The effort sent pain through his shoulder, but he remained standing. The man's phone lay beside him. A message glowed on the screen. "Get the evidence. Do not let the officer survive." The sender was listed only as LH. Ethan stared at the initials. The doubt was gone now. A sudden roar came from the barn. Part of the burning shed roof collapsed, throwing sparks against the adjoining wall. Harold had released the last horse, an old gray gelding named Copper that had once belonged to Matthew. The animal stumbled at the gate and tried to turn back toward its stall. "Come on, old boy," Harold said, pulling at the halter. Copper finally moved. Then a burning support beam fell across the aisle. Harold twisted away, but the beam struck his lower leg and trapped him against the wooden floor. Smoke rolled over him. Copper fled through the open gate. Harold tried to lift the beam. It did not move. "Tighten!" he called. The German shepherd was already running. He reached the barn, stopped at the doorway, and lowered his nose. Smoke filled the aisle, hiding Harold behind fallen boards and scattered hay. Titan moved forward until he found the old farmer's hat. Then he struck one paw against the floor, 3 times. Ethan saw the signal from outside. He found him. Ignoring the pain in his shoulder, Ethan followed Titan into the barn. The heat pressed against his face. He dropped beside Harold and gripped the beam with his good arm. "You should have stayed in the house," Ethan said. Harold coughed. "That advice has arrived late." Together, Ethan and Titan shifted the beam enough for Harold to pull his leg free. Ethan dragged him toward the open doorway as the roof above them groaned. They reached the yard seconds before part of the barn roof collapsed into the aisle. Andrea ran from the house and dropped beside Harold. His leg was bruised, but not broken. Ethan's shoulder had begun bleeding through the bandage again. Titan stood between them, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the men retreating across the field. The attackers had seen lights approaching from the county road. Not police lights, tractor lights. One appeared beyond the gate, then another, then 5 more. Old farm trucks followed behind them, spreading across the road and field entrances. The men who had come to isolate the Ward family now found themselves watched by neighbors arriving from every direction. The attackers fled toward the tree line, leaving the blocked truck behind. Harold sat in the snow and watched the flames consume part of the shed and one side of the barn. "We should leave Red Creek," he said, "tonight, before they come back." Andrea knelt beside him. "No." Harold looked at her. "We lost Matthew because we stayed quiet," she said. "I will not let fear take this house too." Her voice was calm, but nothing in it could be moved. "We leave now, and Logan wins twice. Once over our son. Once over us." Harold looked toward the burned roof, the frightened horses gathering beyond the fence, Ethan standing with one arm pressed against his shoulder, and Titan leaning against his leg. The first tractor stopped at the gate, then another. Neighbors climbed down into the snow, carrying blankets, extinguishers, shovels, and the steady courage of people who had heard a simple message and understood it meant more than a broken fence. The farm was damaged. The evidence remained hidden, and the Ward family was no longer alone. By sunrise, the fire at Ward Farm had been contained. The storage shed was gone. One side of the barn stood blackened, and the yard was covered with wet ash, trampled snow, and the deep tire marks of neighbors who had arrived before the flames could take everything. The farmers of Red Creek did not ask many questions. They brought water tanks, chains, tools, blankets, and hot coffee. Some repaired the broken fence, others watched the road from the cabs of their tractors. Among them was Frank Miller, 68, a retired cattle rancher who had known Harold for more than 40 years. Frank carried a hunting radio and the calm manner of a man who had spent half his life handling storms, injured livestock, and neighbors too proud to ask for help. "You go, do what needs doing," Frank told Harold. "We will keep this place standing." Harold looked toward the damaged barn. "And if Logan comes back?" Frank glanced at the line of tractors near the gate. "Then he will have to explain himself to half the valley." That gave them a narrow window. Andrea changed Ethan's shoulder bandage before they left. The wound had opened during the fire, but he could still move. Harold's leg was badly bruised, and Titan's limp had grown worse, yet none of them considered staying behind. Matthew's coordinates led north through quiet ranch country, then onto a narrow road close to the Canadian border. Snow covered the fields, and the gray morning made every abandoned fence post look like a distant figure. The property appeared after nearly 40 minutes. It had once been a working cattle farm. Now the main house stood empty, several windows were boarded, and rusted equipment leaned beneath collapsed shelters. 4 long barns sat behind the house in a row. Numbers had been painted above the doors. 1, 2, 3, 4. Harold stopped the truck behind a line of dead cottonwoods where it could not be seen from the road. "No vehicles," Andrea said. "That does not mean no one is here," Ethan replied. He checked the waterproof evidence bag, then looked at Titan. The German shepherd had already lifted his nose toward the barns. They crossed the property slowly. Ethan moved first with Titan beside him. Harold followed despite the pain in his leg while Andrea carried Matthew's recorder, notebook, and a compact medical kit. Barn 4 looked less damaged than the others. Its roof was intact and the doors had newer hinges beneath layers of old paint. Harold noticed the difference. "Someone wanted this place to look abandoned," he said, "but not become unusable." Ethan opened the door. Cold air moved through an empty central aisle. Dust covered the floor. Old chains hung from beams, and broken feeding rails lined both sides. There were no crates, no trucks, and no visible sign of recent activity. Harold's face tightened. "Matthew sent us here for this?" Titan moved forward. The dog ignored the stalls and crossed directly to the rear wall. He lowered his head, sniffing along the boards. Near the far corner, he stopped. His body became rigid. Then he struck one paw against the floor 3 times. Ethan joined him. "What do you have?" Titan pressed his nose against a section of wall where several boards were cleaner than the rest. The wood had been stained to match the older panels, but the nails were new. Ethan ran his hand along the edge. "Fresh work." Harold found a crowbar among the tools near the entrance. Together he and Ethan pulled away the first board. Behind it was not insulation or framing. There was a metal door. A narrow handle sat near the floor, hidden beneath the wood. Ethan pulled it open. A stairway descended into darkness. The smell reached them first. Oil, cold metal, packing grease, and gunpowder. Titan's ears rose. Ethan switched on his flashlight. "Stay close." The stairs led into a wide underground storage room supported by concrete columns. Shelves lined the walls. Wooden crates stood in organized rows, some marked as irrigation pumps, tractor components, or grain-handling equipment. One crate had been left open. Inside were rifles wrapped in heavy cloth. Another contained boxes of ammunition. Harold moved slowly between the rows, seeing years of deception arranged beneath the farm. Freight labels carried Northern Harvest markings, but destination forms had been altered. Some listed rural equipment dealers that no longer existed. Others showed routes ending at farms that had never ordered anything. Andrea found a table covered with false bills of sale, driver logs, and blank inspection forms. "These papers could make illegal cargo look ordinary," she said. Ethan opened a metal case near the table. Inside were police badges, uniform patches, vehicle decals, and emergency lights. Some were genuine. Others had been copied well enough to fool anyone driving through snow at night. "They used police vehicles, or vehicles made to look official," Ethan said. "That is how they moved without being stopped." Titan turned toward a narrow passage behind the storage shelves. A sound came from beyond it, weak, uncertain. Ethan raised one hand, signaling the others to remain still. The sound came again, someone breathing. They followed Titan into a small technical room where electrical panels covered one wall. A man sat tied to a chair beneath a bare light fixture. His head hung forward, and his wrists were bound behind him. Ethan recognized him immediately. "Aaron?" Aaron Rodgers was thinner than the photograph in Ethan's case file. Bruises marked one side of his face, and several days of beard covered his jaw. His warehouse jacket was torn, but he was alive. Ethan crossed the room and checked his pulse. "Aaron, can you hear me?" Aaron opened his eyes slowly. For a moment, fear overtook recognition. Then he saw Titan. "You found it," he whispered. Ethan cut the restraints with a utility knife. "How long have you been here?" "I do not know. 4 days. Maybe 5. Andrea gave him water in small amounts and checked his injuries. Aaron's condition was serious, but he did not appear to have broken bones. He gripped Ethan's sleeve. "The files are not enough. We found the weapons." Aaron shook his head. "Patterson will say they were planted. Hughes will say the badges were stolen. You need the shipment records and the payroll list." "Where?" Aaron looked toward the main storage room. "Office cabinet. False bottom." They found both within minutes. The records connected the shipments directly to Gabriel Patterson, 49, owner of Northern Harvest Freight and the public face of the largest transportation company in Red Creek County. Gabriel was known for donating to schools, sponsoring winter food drives, and presenting himself as a businessman who had built local jobs from nothing. The payroll list showed something else. Regular payments had been made to Logan Hughes. Aaron explained that Logan provided patrol schedules, erased reports, redirected officers, and warned Gabriel before every federal inspection. When a driver became suspicious or a warehouse worker asked questions, Logan made sure the complaint disappeared. "And Matthew Ward?" Harold asked. Aaron looked at him. "I only learned his name after I found the old records." Harold stepped closer. "What records?" "A route report from 12 years ago. One driver refused to carry a shipment. His truck left the road before dawn." Before Aaron could continue, Titan turned toward the stairs. A low growl formed in his chest. Footsteps sounded above. Several people entered the barn. Ethan guided Aaron behind a concrete column. The metal door opened. Logan descended first. Gabriel Patterson followed him. Gabriel wore an expensive winter coat and moved with the controlled patience of a man accustomed to giving orders without repeating them. 4 armed men came behind them. Logan looked around the underground room. Then he saw Harold. "You should have stayed on your farm." Harold stepped forward. "You killed my son." Gabriel glanced at Logan, but Logan no longer bothered to deny it. "Matthew found a shipment he was never meant to see," Logan said. "He threatened to report it." Harold's hands curled into fists. "What did you do?" Logan's voice stayed calm. "I followed his truck onto the mountain road. I pushed him toward the shoulder until he lost control. Afterward, we removed the cargo and wrote the report before anyone else arrived." The words struck the room harder than any raised voice. Andrea stood several steps behind Harold. Quietly, she reached into her coat pocket and pressed the record button on Matthew's old recorder. Logan continued. "Your son made a foolish choice. He believed truth protected people." Harold moved before Ethan could stop him. He crossed the space with an anger that had waited 12 years for a name. Ethan caught him around the chest. "Let me go." "No. He killed Matthew." "I know." Harold struggled against him. Ethan held firm despite the pain in his shoulder. "Matthew needs justice," Ethan said. "He does not need his father to become a killer." Harold froze. Across the room, Logan smiled as if he believed restraint was weakness. Andrea kept the recorder hidden inside her pocket. Every word had been captured. Matthew's warning, Logan's confession, the truth about the road. For 12 years, Harold had lived with questions. Now he had the answer. The danger was no longer what they did not know. It was whether any of them would leave Barn 4 alive. For one brief moment, the underground room became completely still. Harold stood facing Logan. Ethan held him back, and Andrea kept one hand inside her coat pocket, protecting the recorder that now carried the truth about Matthew's death. Then Gabriel noticed the movement. His eyes dropped toward Andrea's pocket. "What are you holding?" Andrea did not answer. Gabriel stepped forward, but Titan moved between them and lowered his body. The German shepherd's warning stopped him for only a second. "Take the recorder," Gabriel ordered. One of the armed men advanced. Ethan shifted in front of Andrea, though his injured shoulder made the movement slower than it should have been. Logan watched him with cold patience. "You have nowhere to go." Ethan glanced toward the stairs, then toward the rows of wooden crates. The armed men held the only visible exit. Aaron was too weak to run. Harold could barely put weight on one leg, and Titan was already exhausted. Gabriel reached for the recorder himself. Andrea stepped back. The movement was small, but it changed everything. A loose photograph slid from her coat and fell to the floor. It showed one of the numbered weapon crates from Matthew's hidden box. Gabriel stared at it. Then he understood how much evidence they had brought with them. His face hardened. "Burn it." Logan turned sharply. "Not yet." Gabriel looked at him. "The files, the weapons, the records, all of it. If federal officers arrive, we lose everything. And if they are found dead inside?" Gabriel's voice remained calm. "Then a hidden weapons cache caught fire. Tragic, confusing, difficult to investigate." He looked toward one of his men. "Fuel line." The man crossed to a metal valve near the storage shelves and turned it. A sharp chemical smell spread through the room. Another attacker kicked over a container near the crates, sending fuel across the concrete floor. Ethan moved toward him, but Logan raised his weapon. "Stay where you are." Gabriel struck a lighter. The first flame touched the floor and ran beneath the nearest crate with frightening speed. Canvas coverings caught. Dry packing material ignited. Within seconds, orange light climbed the stacked wood and rolled toward the ceiling. The armed men retreated toward the stairs. Logan followed. Gabriel was the last to leave. Before closing the metal door, he looked back at Harold. "Your son made the same mistake. He believed evidence mattered more than power." The door slammed. A heavy lock turned above them. Smoke began filling the storage room. Aaron coughed and nearly fell. Ethan caught him with his good arm. "We need another exit." Harold looked toward the hidden stairway. "They locked the only one." "No," Andrea said. "This place has electrical equipment and underground storage. There must be ventilation." Titan had already begun searching. The dog moved along the floor with his nose low, ignoring the growing heat and the gunfire residue around the crates. Smoke thickened above him, but the air near the concrete remained clearer. Ethan wrapped part of his shirt across Aaron's mouth. "Stay close to the ground." The fire moved from crate to crate. Ammunition boxes began popping under the heat, small sharp sounds that warned of what would happen if they remained much longer. Titan crossed behind the metal shelves and stopped near the rear wall. He pawed at a rusted grate. 3 times. Ethan followed him. Behind the grate was a narrow maintenance tunnel, barely high enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air moved from inside it. "This leads somewhere," Ethan said. Harold used the crowbar to tear the grate free. The opening revealed a dark passage lined with old brick and metal piping. Titan entered first. Ethan helped Aaron crawl behind him. Andrea followed while supporting Harold, who moved with difficulty because of his injured leg. Smoke pushed them lower as they entered the tunnel. The passage narrowed after several yards. Titan continued forward, pausing at each turn to test the air. The tunnel sloped upward, then curved beneath the rear edge of the property. Behind them, the underground room groaned as fire weakened the supports. Aaron's breathing became rough. "I cannot keep going." "You can," Ethan said. "One more movement at a time." Andrea kept one hand beneath Aaron's arm. "Do not think about the whole distance. Just reach the next section." The tunnel opened into a wider drainage space. Ice covered the floor, and frozen roots pushed through cracks in the brick. Ahead, a faint gray light showed through an old metal screen. Titan reached it and began scratching at the lower edge. Harold and Ethan pulled the screen inward. Cold air rushed through. Beyond it was a shallow frozen creek behind the abandoned ranch. They were almost out. Then Titan stopped. His head turned toward the darkness behind them. At first, Ethan heard nothing except the roar of fire and the coughing of the others. Then came a faint human sound. A low cry. Titan turned around. "No," Ethan said. "Titan, come." The German shepherd took 2 steps back into the tunnel. The cry came again. Someone was still inside. Titan disappeared into the smoke before Ethan could catch him. Ethan looked toward Andrea. "Get Aaron and Harold outside." "You cannot go back alone." "I am not leaving him." Harold leaned against the wall. "Go." Ethan turned and followed Titan. The smoke had grown heavier. Heat pressed through the bricks and part of the tunnel ceiling had begun shedding dust. Titan found the source of the sound near a side opening that led back toward the technical rooms. A young officer lay against the wall. It was Scott Bell, the 31-year-old deputy who had accompanied Logan to the Ward farm. His uniform was torn near the shoulder, and one leg was trapped beneath a fallen section of metal shelving. A shallow wound marked his side. Titan gripped Scott's sleeve and pulled. The officer opened his eyes. "Leave me." Ethan crouched beside him. "What happened?" Scott struggled to speak. "I heard Logan tell Mercer they were going back to kill you and burn the house. I said I would report it." His face tightened with pain. "Logan shot me. Gabriel's men brought me here." Titan pulled at his sleeve again. Scott looked at the dog. "He will not leave, will he?" "No." Together, Ethan and Titan shifted the metal frame enough for Scott to drag his leg free. Ethan pulled one of Scott's arms across his shoulders. The return through the tunnel was slower. Behind them, a heavy explosion shook the underground room. The passage trembled and part of the brick ceiling collapsed where they had been moments earlier. Andrea met them halfway. She helped support Scott while Ethan guided Titan forward. They reached the creek just as part of Barn 4 folded inward above the burning storage room. The roof dropped with a deep wooden roar, sending flame and smoke into the winter sky. Harold and Aaron were waiting beside the frozen water. For several seconds, no one spoke. They were alive. Then engines sounded beyond the trees. Ethan climbed the bank and saw several northern harvest trucks moving across the far field toward different border roads. Gabriel's men were trying to scatter before the fire drew attention, but the roads were no longer open. From the south came tractors, farm trucks, hay haulers, and livestock trailers. The farmers of Red Creek had followed the message passed through the radio network. They blocked the narrow roads with heavy equipment, steel gates, and portable fencing. Frank Miller stood beside an old tractor at the first crossing, holding the radio Andrea had used. "You asked for neighbors," he called. "You got most of the county." The first northern harvest truck stopped. The second tried another road and found 2 hay wagons locked across it. A third turned toward a pasture, only to meet a line of cattle panels and 3 ranchers who had no intention of moving. Sirens approached from the east. Dark federal vehicles entered the property, followed by marked units from outside Red Creek County. Megan Howard stepped out first. She wore a heavy field coat over body armor and carried herself with the direct focus of someone who had spent years entering dangerous places after others had tried to erase the evidence. She saw Ethan, Aaron, the burning barn, and the armed men abandoning their vehicles. "Federal agents," she called. "Weapons down." Gabriel tried to reach a truck near the northern fence. 2 agents intercepted him before he made it halfway. Several of his men surrendered. Others were forced to the ground beside the road. Logan did not wait. He ran toward a county SUV parked behind the abandoned farmhouse, started it, and drove across the snow-covered field. Ethan saw him through the smoke. "Logan!" Titan was already moving. The German shepherd ran into the open field, favoring his injured leg but refusing to slow. He crossed directly into the SUV's path and planted himself in the snow. Logan struck the brakes. The vehicle slid sideways and stopped only a few feet from Titan. Ethan reached the driver's door as Logan pushed it open and reached inside his coat. "Do not." Logan ignored him. Ethan caught his wrist, forced the weapon away, and drove him against the side of the SUV. The struggle lasted only seconds. Then Ethan closed the handcuffs around Logan's wrists. The farmers stood watching from the road. So did Scott Bell, supported by Andrea. The same people who had once trusted Logan now saw him dragged away from a vehicle used to escape a burning weapons cache. Megan collected the recorder from Andrea, the USB from Ethan, and the shipment records Aaron identified. Scott gave his first statement beside the creek. Behind them, federal agents opened the remaining trucks and found more weapon crates hidden beneath farm equipment. No single piece of evidence could be dismissed now. The recording held Logan's confession. The USB connected Northern Harvest to the shipments. Aaron could explain the warehouse system. Scott could testify about the planned murders. The weapons beneath Barn 4 spoke for themselves. Titan stood beside Ethan, breathing heavily. Ethan rested his hand against the dog's neck. "You went back." Titan looked toward Scott, then toward the handcuffed Logan. The old dog had not chosen the easiest path. He had chosen the one that left no one behind. By the time spring returned to Red Creek, the snow had withdrawn from the fields. The creeks were moving again, and green shoots had begun to rise through the dark soil around Ward Farm. The investigation lasted through the final weeks of winter. Federal agents searched Northern Harvest offices, freight yards, storage buildings, and private properties connected to Gabriel Patterson. They recovered weapons, false shipping records, payment ledgers, forged police documents, and lists of buyers on both sides of the border. The network was larger than anyone in Red Creek had understood. For years, Gabriel had used ordinary freight routes to move illegal weapons inside shipments marked as farm machinery, fencing equipment, and grain supplies. Drivers were paid to remain silent. Warehouse workers were threatened. Police schedules were changed so the trucks could pass unnoticed. The evidence from Barn 4 gave investigators the center of the operation. The USB Aaron had copied showed the routes. The payroll records tied Gabriel to Logan. Andrea's recording captured Logan admitting what he had done to Matthew. Scott Bell's testimony explained how Logan had ordered the attack on Ward Farm and later tried to silence anyone who resisted. Gabriel Patterson was charged with illegal weapons trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, bribery, organized crime, and obstruction of a federal investigation. Several men who worked for him accepted agreements to testify, but Gabriel refused to admit responsibility. It no longer mattered. The records spoke clearly. Logan Hughes faced charges of corruption, obstruction, conspiracy, attempted murder, abuse of authority, and responsibility for Matthew Ward's death. During the proceedings, the respectful image he had built over many years disappeared piece by piece. The church donations, public speeches, and careful handshakes could not hide the patrol schedules he had altered or the money he had accepted. He had protected the people moving weapons through Red Creek. He had also betrayed every officer who trusted his badge. The old report concerning Matthew's death was reopened. Investigators returned to the mountain road where his truck had gone over the edge 12 years earlier. They compared the original photographs with the confession, fuel records, and freight documents found in the hidden tin box. The report had claimed Matthew lost control because he was tired. The new investigation found signs that another vehicle had forced him toward the shoulder. The missing cargo had been removed before local emergency teams arrived. Logan had signed off on the first findings and prevented further examination. A new official record was issued. Matthew Ward had not died because he was careless. He had died while trying to expose a criminal operation that endangered his community. When Harold received the amended report, he read it alone at the kitchen table. Andrea sat across from him without speaking. The words did not remove the pain. They did not return the 12 years Harold had spent wondering whether he had failed his son, but they gave Matthew back his name. Harold placed the document beside the old photograph from Matthew's room. "You were right," he said quietly. "I should have listened sooner." Andrea reached across the table and covered his hand. "You are listening now." Aaron Rodgers recovered slowly. He spent several weeks in the hospital, then moved with his wife and daughter to a safer location while the federal case continued. As the main warehouse witness, he explained the coded shipping system, the hidden routes, and the way Northern Harvest concealed weapons inside legitimate cargo. He had once believed fear made him weak. Instead, his decision to copy the files helped bring down the entire network. Scott Bell also testified. His wounds healed, though he walked with a cane for several months. He admitted that he had ignored signs of corruption because Logan had been his superior, and because questioning a respected officer felt dangerous. Scott did not excuse himself. He told investigators that loyalty to a uniform meant nothing if it required abandoning the truth. His testimony helped reveal how Logan had manipulated younger officers, redirected patrols, and used department resources to protect Gabriel. Megan remained in Red Creek until the major arrests were complete. One afternoon, she met Ethan outside the temporary county office and offered him a position with the federal task force. "You know trafficking routes," she said. "You understand working dogs, rural communities, and the way local corruption hides behind familiar faces. We could use you." Ethan looked across the parking lot, where Titan rested beside the passenger door of his truck. The German Shepherd's rear leg had healed, though the old injury still caused a slight limp. The veterinarian had also ordered lighter duty because of the strain Titan had suffered during the fire and the escape from Barn 4. "I appreciate the offer," Ethan said, "but Red Creek needs rebuilding." Megan studied him. "The department or the town?" "Both." Ethan chose to remain. He helped create a new K-9 training program with stricter reporting rules, independent evidence reviews, and outside supervision for major investigations. Scott returned to work under limited duty and later joined the reform effort. Titan became the first member of the rebuilt K-9 unit, though his schedule changed. He no longer spent long nights on border roads or climbed through dangerous storage sites. He performed shorter searches, visited local schools, and trained younger dogs who often tested his patience. Every weekend, Ethan drove him to Ward Farm. Titan knew the road before they reached the gate. His ears would rise, and he would sit straighter as the farmhouse and barn came into view. Harold and Andrea had spent the spring rebuilding the damaged section of the barn. The neighbors donated timber, tools, roofing sheets, and more advice than Harold believed any one structure required. Instead of restoring every stall for horses, the couple converted part of the barn into a quiet care area for injured and retired working dogs. There were low beds, heated water bowls, storage for medicine, and a fenced yard where older dogs could walk without being disturbed by livestock. Andrea managed the medical supplies. Harold handled repairs and claimed he was only there because someone had to prevent the dogs from taking over the entire farm. One Saturday, he entered the kitchen and found Titan eating pieces of cooked beef from a clean bowl. Harold looked at Andrea. "That is better meat than we had for supper." Andrea continued slicing vegetables. "Titan earned it. I repaired half the roof. He listens better than you." Harold opened his mouth, considered his options, then looked at Titan. The dog met his eyes and continued eating. Harold pulled out a chair. "I see there is no fairness left in this house." Andrea smiled. It was a small moment, but laughter had been absent from Ward Farm for too many years. Now it returned easily, no longer sounding like something borrowed from another family. In late April, the people of Red Creek gathered beside the repaired barn. Farmers arrived in clean work shirts. Officers stood near federal agents. Families brought food, flowers, and photographs of working dogs they had known. A new wooden sign had been covered with a white cloth near the gate. Harold stood beside Andrea. Ethan and Megan waited behind them, while Titan sat near Harold's leg with a new leather collar around his neck. When the cloth was removed, the sign read, "Matthew Ward Memorial Barn. No one who seeks shelter will be turned away." Harold placed one weathered hand against the wood. For a moment he saw Matthew as a young man walking across the yard, carrying a fuel ledger beneath his arm and trying to decide whether his father would believe him. Harold could not return to that evening. He could not change the words he had spoken, but he could decide what his home would become now. Andrea slipped her hand into his. Ethan stood quietly beside Titan. Megan looked across the fields where the last traces of snow had vanished from the low ground. The same community that had once trusted Logan had also found the courage to stand against him. Farmers had blocked roads with tractors. A warehouse clerk had risked his life for copied records. A young deputy had chosen truth over obedience. An old couple had opened their home to a stranger. No single person had defeated the network alone. That was why it had fallen. Titan leaned against Harold's leg. The old farmer looked down. "You started all this trouble." Titan gave one quiet breath and rested his head against Harold's knee. Justice had not brought Matthew home. It had not erased grief or made the past fair, but it restored his name, returned peace to his parents, and reminded Red Creek that ordinary people were never powerless when they stood together. Sometimes the help God sends does not arrive beneath bright skies or with a clear explanation. Sometimes it lies unconscious on cold straw, guarded by a faithful dog, waiting for someone kind enough to open the door. This story was never only about a wounded officer, a loyal K-9, or a hidden network of corruption. It was about what happens when ordinary people choose courage after years of silence. Harold could not go back and change the moment he failed to understand his son. Andrea could not erase the grief that had lived inside their home for 12 years. Ethan could not undo the betrayal that nearly cost him his life. But together, they proved that the past does not have to control the final chapter. Matthew's truth survived because one family finally chose to listen. Ethan survived because Titan refused to leave him behind. And an entire town found its courage because a few people stood firm when fear told them to look away. The lesson is simple. Doing the right thing is not always easy, and justice does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes truth waits beneath old floorboards. Sometimes it hides inside a forgotten recording. Sometimes it comes to our door, cold, wounded, and guarded by a faithful dog. But when good people stand together, even the strongest lie can fall. Thank you for watching and for walking with Harold, Andrea, Ethan, and Titan through this journey of grief, courage, loyalty, and hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories about brave people, loyal animals, second chances, and the bonds that can change a life. Until the next story, may you always have the courage to speak the truth, the kindness to open your door, and the faith to believe that no honest act is ever wasted.